Hello and welcome to the qualifying edition of the race weekend data analysis for the Hungarian Grand Prix. This is the series in which we compile all of the qualifying data from the session that has just finished and pit each of the teammates against each other to see exactly how well they have performed against one another. Everything is timestamped in the description down below, so feel free to skip to whichever team you would like me to talk about. But with all of that out of the way, let us jump on into the qualifying data of today's episode. But before we start, we take a look at the Audience Prediction Championships, and it is Edwin Savona who takes the lead, 10 points so far for qualifying. 1 point clear of Joshua, and then 2 points clear of Archie, Divit Rayhan and Torst as well. Chewbacca up there, and then myself all the way down in the bottom half of this leaderboard, joint on 4 with about a bajillion other people. And one of those other people is the current championship leader, Evan Darcy, joint on 4 with myself, Ellie and Danielle B, Hal, Jiff A, and then we have the second half of the leaderboard here with people like Joe Bisho, Ritteraj, Leroy, Liam, Libra and Min Verstappen as well. But not to worry, there is still a lot of ground to make up in the Grand Prix, and if you guys want to get involved in the Audience Prediction Championships, make sure to check out my videos that get released on the Thursdays before each of the Grand Prix to get involved. So let's just quickly recap what happened in today's qualifying session, and we start with Q1. It was topped quite dominantly by Max Verstappen, a 16.2, the fastest time that we had seen all weekend, on the medium compound of tyre as well. But it is George Russell who is knocked out in Q1 for the first time this season. Now that is absolutely not going to bode well whatsoever for the Grand Prix, as Hungary is a very difficult track to overtake on. It is long as well, so I think they're going to struggle come tomorrow. But from Q1, we'll take a look at Q2, and out is Daniel Ricciardo, Lance Stroll, the two Alfa Romeos. Slightly unsurprising there, but definitely Daniel Ricciardo and Lance Stroll. And then Carlos Sainz crashing out at the last corner, causing a red flag with about 6 to 7 minutes left to go. So that has really hampered Ferrari's weekend at trying to claw some points back, especially seeing Lando Norris in P2. However, what is exceptionally interesting is that Max Verstappen blasted in a 15.6 when he was comfortably in the top 5 of the leaderboards on the medium tyre, and then he puts in that 15.6 on the soft, the same as Sergio Perez, who did a 16.4. Both Red Bulls are through to Q3 on the softs, with Mercedes through on the mediums. And then that leads us into Q3, and it is the second front row lockout of the season, I believe, for Mercedes. Lewis Hamilton takes his 101st pole position, 0.3 clear from Valtteri Bottas, one of the biggest margins for Mercedes this weekend, and then Verstappen can only manage P3, with Sergio Perez 0.6 back. Then Pierre Gasly put in a mega shift for AlphaTauri to go P5, ahead of Lando Norris and also Charles Leclerc. Now, there was actually a tiny, squidge little bit of controversy, obviously. There always is going to be a little bit of controversy surrounding this pole position, as Lewis Hamilton drove extremely slowly on his outlap. However, if you take a look at the actual outlap times, it was about 2 or 3 seconds quicker than his previous Q3 outlap. So it wasn't a super slow outlap, and he was still under the 1 minute 31 outlap time between the two safety car lines. It's just he did hold up Max Verstappen. Bit of gamesmanship more than anything. Touch unsportsmanlike, some could say. Some people saying it's a bit really harsh, which I don't really agree with. It's just a little bit of gamesmanship and kind of robbed us a little bit of a Q3 showdown. As we did see, the track was evolving in the last couple of runs, and we never saw Hamilton or Verstappen put in a decent second run. But Valtteri Bottas also didn't improve, and he was ahead of Lewis Hamilton, who was holding up the two Red Bulls, and then Perez never actually started his final Q3 run. He crossed the line, and that was it. The checkered flag was already waving. So already the mind games are continuing from their incident in Silverstone, and with Hamilton P1 and Verstappen P3, they're behind each other. It could be interesting going into turn 1, especially with the two Red Bulls behind on the soft compound of tyres, who have had traditionally better starts than Mercedes so far this season. It's going to be interesting. But what we can do from these qualifying times is we can map them onto a qualifying progression graph, and we can see how much it did cost Max Verstappen and how much time Mercedes did find in Q3, as Max Verstappen was comfortably are on average across the 2 sessions about 3/10 faster than anybody else, period. And then he lost that all in Q3. But then I suppose that just goes to show that you should really get in a very decent banker lap first to stop any of the heroics from the Mercedes man coming up in the second run. But that's the way Formula 1 runs, and that's the way it has always run, and that is the way it has been today. But taking each team's fastest time from session to session, we can take a look at their improvement. And the most improved team from Q1 to Q2 was actually McLaren down at the bottom, gaining almost 7/10 between their 2 times, with Mercedes actually losing just over 1/10 of a second, with Alfa Romeo being just on the cusp of losing time. However, switching that to Q2 to Q3 improvement, Mercedes gain a whopping 1.1 seconds from their fastest Q2 time to their fastest Q3 time, with Red Bull losing 2/10, so we can really see how much that impacted them, how much Max Verstappen's poor banker lap actually set them back, as he set a 15.6 in Q2 on the softs, and his first run in Q3 was a 15.9. Really not ideal. But enough of the chit-chat about the overall qualifying session. We're now going to break down each of the teammates, and we're going in 2020 championship order, so we start with Mercedes and we'll end with Williams. And so first up is Mercedes, and then all the way on the left we have their Q1, 2 and 3 positions throughout the season so far. And I do believe this is their second front row lockout of the year, as I believe there was one in Portugal. But looking at the overall progression chart in the top middle, both drivers extracting pretty much everything out of the car, as they follow exactly the same trend. Both drivers lose a significant amount of time into Q2 and then gain a mammoth amount of time into Q3. It is just Lewis Hamilton is that one step above Valtteri Bottas in qualifying. But compared to the averages across the season so far, we see that in Q1 across this whole season, Lewis Hamilton has been 7/10 faster than Valtteri Bottas, whereas Q1 this time he was only 1/10.5. And then come Q3, the gap is 4/10 in Lewis Hamilton's favour, whereas it was 3/10 in Hungary in the top right. But then from Mercedes, we can take a look at Red Bull, and again, both drivers have a very similar progressions chart, so both drivers extracting everything that they can out of that car. Both gaining a significant amount of time into Q2, so the reverse of Mercedes, and then both drivers losing time into Q3, as both drivers didn't set competitive banker laps, and then neither driver improved on their time on their second run. However, Sergio Perez is a whopping 8/10 back across all 3 sessions. That is just unacceptable. That's even bigger than some of the gaps we ever saw with Gasly and also Albon. And it is annoying having to keep bringing up all of these different comparisons between Gasly and Albon and Perez, but when you're over a second off the pace in Q1 and then you can only get as close as just under 8/10 in Q2, you kind of have to. But we can see that averages across the season so far have been much better than what Gasly and Albon have done previously, with half a second in Q3, which is the most important one, and then 3/10 in Q1 and in Q2. So not an ideal session for Sergio Perez, but hopefully starting P4 he is above all of the riff-raff rubbish of the midfield, so hopefully they can put an upset to Mercedes. Then from Red Bull, we'll take a look at McLaren, and unfortunately for Daniel Ricciardo, a scrappy lap in Q2 unfortunately knocked him out by just 0.08 of a second. It was really close to Sebastian Vettel, but again, being half a second back on average across both sessions is just a little bit too much. It is significantly over his Q2 advantage over Lando Norris so far, which stands at 3.5 and then about the same for the Q1 average. So it's from Daniel Ricciardo in Hungary, for a track that he actually likes, for a track that he took a victory at, not his maiden victory, I think it was his second victory in Formula 1. But we shall see what he can do in the race. Starting P11, he does have a fresh set of tyres and a free tyre choice. Then from McLaren, we'll take a look at Aston Martin, and again, a little bit disappointing from Lance Stroll, not being able to make it through into Q3, and having actually outperformed Sebastian Vettel in Q1, only just by half a tenth of a second, and then again, it was a tenth of a second in Q2 in favour of Sebastian Vettel. So really close margins, with Vettel making it through, and then Lance not making it through, but being less than a tenth behind. Very, very fine margins. But these two are exceptionally close, and I'm expecting them to be even closer in the Grand Prix, so perhaps an Aston Martin double points finish is on the cards. Then from Aston Martin, we'll take a look at Alpine, and actually a very competitive session for Alpine. I kind of predicted that they could be an outside shot for a top 5 with the likes of Fernando Alonso and also Esteban Ocon possibly, but my money would preferably be on the Spaniard. But Ocon actually managed to get the better of Alonso in Q3, mainly because of an extremely poor run in Q3 for Alonso. Having bested Ocon by just over 2 tenths in both Q1 and Q2 previously, Alonso managed to slightly mess up his Q3 run. But definitely their race pace is going to be one to watch out for, and can definitely contest with Leclerc and also Norris and then Gasly that are the 3 cars ahead. However, if there are no incidents with the 2 Mercedes and the 2 Red Bulls up at the front, I feel they're just going to waltz away into the distance, and it's going to be a battle for P5. Then from Alpine, we'll take a look at Ferrari, and poor Carlos Sainz, really gutting. I'm not entirely sure what happened on his run. He never actually set a lap in Q2. There was 6.5 minutes left of the session. He was following Charles Leclerc round. Leclerc sets a lap time, and then unfortunately Carlos Sainz just bins it. Coming into the last corner, he didn't step on the curbs, didn't really do much. It could have been a gust of wind or something like that, I'm not 100% sure. He just lost the rear and dipped it into the wall. It was a strong rear lateral impact, so perhaps the gearbox could have taken a knock, and we know that Ferrari aren't the best gearbox checkers that we've seen this season, so they're definitely going to have to check over that gearbox before the start of the Grand Prix tomorrow. But seeing how competitive Sainz was in Q1, it is looking likely that he'll climb up that leaderboard in the race. However, it's Hungary, and it is a little bit difficult to overtake. Then from Ferrari, we'll take a look at Alfa Tauri, and God, I think it was actually a bit early to move Yuki Tsunoda up to Formula 1. That's what I'm thinking right now. He's just a little bit slow. So not only is he over a second off of Pierre Gasly in Q1, he also had that crash in FP2 as well, which has just sort of hampered his weekend. And then just not overly being really consistent, and it's going to be such a struggle from P16 on the grid to actually move forwards and to get some points for AlphaTauri. I really don't think that's even on the cards, depending on the Grand Prix. Yeah, it's really difficult. I wanted to say the first 6, the first 7, the first 8 races were just him getting used to the sport, but it's been 11. We're coming into the summer break. I'd have liked to have seen just a little bit of progression, and unfortunately, that just hasn't happened. But Pierre Gasly, though, is on an absolute storm in that AlphaTauri, and qualifying P5 is absolutely mega. Then from AlphaTauri, we'll take a look at Alfa Romeo, and for once Kimi Räikkönen had a decent qualifying, much like he did in the sprint race actually, but I'm not really counting that because the sprint race was a bit For traditional qualifying, Kimi Räikkönen managed to get out of Q2 for the first race in 4 races, I think it was, something like that. A long old time for Kimi Räikkönen. And actually being able to beat Giovinazzi, who he hasn't been able to beat for, again, the same 4 or 5 races. And then we know that Raikkonen's race pace is just absolutely mega, but again, it's Hungary, it's difficult to overtake points if there is some hecticness going on up at the front. Then penultimately, we'll take a look at Haas, and there is even less data to look at than usual because unfortunately Mick Schumacher didn't even start qualifying due to his hefty crash in FP3 that I believe was just over 30 Gs, so he was taken to the hospital for precautionary checks as is standard for impacts above 30 G. But now unfortunately there is nothing to compare for the Haas cars as Mick Schumacher wasn't able to set any benchmark times to compare Nikita Mazepin to. So instead finally we'll take a look at Williams. Disappointing is the word of the day for Williams. George Russell out in Q1 for the first time this season, which was honestly a big surprise. I was expecting him easily to get through to Q2 and then potentially battle for Q3, but it just didn't work. Whether the fact the track was cooler than it was the past couple of days in the running on Friday, Whether he just couldn't get the tyres warmed up, whether there was just another issue altogether, I don't know, but the gap was extremely close. Again, it was less than half a tenth or less than a tenth of a second to getting in to Q2. And there we go, there is all of the qualifying data wound up for the Hungarian Grand Prix. Please let me know in the comments down below what you thought of today's qualifying session, and then also what you found most interesting about the data presented. But that is all I've got for you today, guys. I hope you have enjoyed, and I will catch you in the next episode with whatever and whenever I decide to make it. I'll see you guys then.